Every single morning, billions of people willingly put a psychoactive stimulant into their bodies before they are even fully awake. We dress it up in ceramic mugs, artisan roasters, and Instagram-worthy latte art, but make no mistake, we are running the largest, most normalized drug operation on the planet. Roughly 85% of the population consumes it every single day. The average adult takes in 210 milligrams a morning. But the top 10%, they are pushing past 520 milligrams daily, well above what health agencies consider a safe upper limit. We put it in our drinks, our protein bars, our gum, and our medications. We give it to ourselves. We give it to our children. And we built an entire global economy around getting it to our lips as fast as humanly possible. And yet we treat it like it's harmless. We act like there isn't a massive psychological spectrum between enjoys a morning cup on weekends and cannot form a coherent sentence without 600 milligrams in their bloodstream by 8 a.m. But there are levels to this. 7 of them, to be precise. And you are almost certainly somewhere on this list. Level 1. The occasional sipper, you know the type. Orders a vanilla latte when they're at the airport. Grabs a coffee at the gas station on a long road trip because it felt like the right thing to do. Maybe nurses half a can of soda during a movie. These people are not coffee people. They will say that with confidence. I'm not really a coffee person, and honestly, they mean it. The level 1 caffeine consumer treats caffeine the way most people treat a fireworks show. It is a special occasion thing. Memorable when it happens, but completely forgettable the rest of the time. They are not dependent on it, not seeking it out, not thinking about it on a Tuesday morning when they wake up perfectly fine without it in it. Their brain has not yet rewired itself around the substance. Their adenosine receptors are still functioning exactly as nature designed them. Here is what that means quickly, because it matters for later. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors in your brain. Adenosine is a molecule that builds up throughout the day and signals sleepiness. By the end of the day, you have maximum adenosine, and your brain says it is time for sleep. Caffeine physically looks similar enough to adenosine that it sneaks in and blocks those receptors, so the sleepiness signal never gets sent. On top of that, blocking adenosine receptors also triggers the release of dopamine, which is the brain's feel-good chemical. So caffeine both blocks fatigue and creates a reward sensation. It's elegant, biochemically speaking, and it is also precisely what makes it so easy to end up wanting more of it. But the level 1 person has not crossed that threshold yet. They feel caffeine the way it was designed to be felt, as an occasional, notable boost. When they drink it, they actually feel it, really feel it. Their heart beats a little faster. They get a little wired. They might even feel anxious if they had a full cup on an empty stomach, because their system is not used to it. They set no daily routines around caffeine. They do not structure their mornings around it. They do not miss it when it is not there. They have no withdrawal, no ritual, no dependence. This is caffeine as a product, not caffeine as a lifestyle. They are essentially tourists to the substance, and they will stay tourists for the rest of their lives, unless something changes. The key thing about level 1 is that it is completely voluntary. Every cup is a choice. None of it is need. Level 2, the daily drinker. And here is where things start to shift. The level 2 person has a coffee every morning, without fail. It is part of the routine now. Wake up, make coffee, start the day. It happens so consistently that skipping it would feel genuinely weird. Not necessarily because they would feel terrible, but because the ritual has become part of how the day is structured. Morning coffee is as automatic as brushing their teeth. At this stage, caffeine has woven itself into the fabric of daily life. Studies show that about 64% of Americans consume caffeine daily, and most of them are here. At level 2, they are not chasing a high. They are not desperate. They just like it. They have it every day. And the idea of stopping makes them mildly uncomfortable in a vague, undefined sort of way. Here is what is actually happening in the brain, though. Once you drink caffeine regularly, your brain starts producing more adenosine receptors to compensate for the ones being blocked. It is a classic neurological counter-adaptation. Your brain figures out that its signals are being jammed, and it simply builds more transmitters. Now it takes the same amount of caffeine just to feel normal. Not enhanced, just normal. You have not gained an advantage anymore. You have simply established a nutritional baseline, and your morning coffee is the toll you pay to reach it. The level 2 drinker probably does not think about any of this. They do not need to. Life is functioning. The coffee is good. Everything is fine. They might skip a day occasionally and notice an pedal headache in the afternoon. Chalk it up to not drinking enough water. Take an ibuprofen and move on without ever connecting the dots. That headache, incidentally, happens because when caffeine is removed, the blood vessels in the brain dilate. The opposite of what caffeine causes. And the resulting change in blood flow creates pressure and pain. It is a real physiological caffeine withdrawal symptom, and most level 2 drinkers have it regularly without ever recognizing it for what it is. But again, things are still fine here. They are functional, healthy, choosing caffeine freely, and would have little trouble cutting back if they genuinely tried. Little trouble, not no trouble. There is a difference. Level 3, the coffee enthusiast. Oh, here we go. The level 3 person has opinions, strong ones. They know the difference between a cortado and a flat white. They have a preferred roast, a preferred brew method, and they will absolutely tell you about it unprompted. They own a burr grinder. They have downloaded a coffee timer app. They once described a cup as having notes of cherry and dark chocolate with a bright, clean finish, and they meant it without irony. Here is the fun twist, though. Level 3 is where the love of caffeine often disguises itself as sophisticated taste. The enthusiast genuinely believes they are in this for the craft, for the flavor, for the experience. And they are, partly. But if you told them they had to switch to decaf across the board, watch how quickly the sophisticated appreciation crumbles. They are not just in it for the taste. They are in it for what the taste delivers. The level 3 drinker typically consumes 2 to 3 cups a day, sometimes 4. They probably hover somewhere between 300 and 400 milligrams of caffeine daily, right up near the FDA's recommended ceiling of 400 milligrams per day for healthy adults. They are functional and genuinely enjoy the substance, but the dependency has deepened. Skipping coffee is no longer just a weird morning. It is a bad morning. There is irritability. There is a dull ache behind the eyes. There is a reduced ability to concentrate until the ritual is completed. What is notable about level 3 is the social layer that caffeine has acquired. Coffee is how they connect. It is what they offer guests. It is how they get through work meetings, brainstorming sessions, early flights, long drives, late deadlines. It has graduated from a beverage to a personal identity marker. They are a coffee person now. Capital C. That identity will matter in a few levels. Tolerance is established and growing. The brain has adapted. The morning cup that once felt like a genuine lift now just removes the absence of it. And that quietly is the subtle genius of caffeine addiction. It tricks you into believing it is giving you energy, when in large part it is just removing the withdrawal that would have occurred without it. Level 4, the dependent. We are past the lifestyle stage now. Level 4 is where caffeine stops being something you enjoy and starts being something your body genuinely requires to operate at baseline human functionality. Not enhanced functionality. Baseline. Just normal. The level 4 person is not a morning person without their coffee. They are not a person at all without their coffee as far as their body is concerned. Add to basket, they need it within the first 30 minutes of waking up, or the headache starts. Not a mild background ache, a real throbbing, do not talk to me headache. Research from the NIH confirms that caffeine withdrawal symptoms, including these headaches, typically begin within 12 to 24 hours of the last dose, can peak anywhere from 20 to 51 hours in, and result physically from the brain's blood vessels dilating after caffeine is removed. The severity correlates directly with how much caffeine you normally consume. This is a person whose body has learned to expect caffeine so consistently that its absence registers as a medical event. The level 4 person has usually crossed into multiple cups per day territory without ever making a conscious decision to do so. 1 cup became 2 because 1 stopped working. 2 became 3 for the same reason. The brain kept building new adenosine receptors, tolerance kept climbing, and the dose required to feel normal kept rising. They are probably at 400 to 600 milligrams a day now. That is the equivalent of 4 to 6 standard cups of coffee, or somewhere between 2 and 3 large energy drinks, or some chaotic combination of both. The physical dependence at this level is real and documented. The American Medical Association notes that consuming more than 400 milligrams per day regularly leads to symptoms like nervousness, irritability, and increased heart rate. The level 4 person knows these sensations intimately. They live in a narrow window of functional caffeine exposure. Too little and the withdrawal hits, too much and the anxiety and jitters kick in. They are constantly calibrating, probably without consciously realizing that is what they are doing. They have tried to cut back, maybe, probably. They lasted 2 days before the headaches, the fatigue, the brain fog, and what researchers describe as a low or depressed mood drove them straight back to the coffee pot. They do not see this as a relapse. They see it as being sensible. After all, it is just coffee. After all, everyone drinks it. After all, it is not like it is a real drug. It is, though. It absolutely is. Level 5, the high-dose addict. The level 5 person is no longer drinking coffee, tea, or soda. They are conducting a daily pharmaceutical operation. They have likely switched, at least partly, to energy drinks, energy shots, caffeine pills, or pre-workout powders because the ritual beverages simply do not deliver the milligrams fast enough anymore. They know exactly how much caffeine is in every product they consume. They are tracking it, not because they are trying to stay under the limit, but because they are trying to stay above the functional threshold. Daily intake at this level routinely exceeds 600 milligrams, and for some people pushes into the 800 to 1000 milligram range. Just as a reference point, the FDA recommends no more than 400 milligrams for healthy adults, and says that intakes much above that are not generally considered safe and can cause caffeine intoxication. The DSM-5 actually includes caffeine intoxication as a clinical diagnosis, defined as consuming a large amount of caffeine, typically exceeding 250 milligrams in a short period, and experiencing restlessness, insomnia, rapid heartbeat, and in extreme cases, significant impairment in daily functioning. At level 5, the body has adapted so extensively that what would cause a level 1 person to have a full-on anxiety attack barely registers as a warm-up dose. Tolerance at this stage is not just psychological, it is structural. Regular caffeine consumption causes the brain to grow additional adenosine receptors, meaning that when you add caffeine, there are simply more receptors to block. So you need more caffeine to block all of them. It is a self-perpetuating cycle, where the substance creates the very need it then temporarily satisfies. Sleep at level 5 is a disaster. Caffeine's half-life in the body ranges from 3 to 7 hours, depending on individual metabolism. which means that a 500 milligram dose taken at 2 p.m. still has 250 milligrams circulating at 9 p.m. The level 5 person has probably given up on healthy sleep entirely, framing it as a personality quirk rather than a consequence of their consumption. I just do not sleep much, right? The anxiety is ramping up too, because excessive caffeine consumption is strongly associated with heightened anxiety and can aggravate existing anxiety disorders. Heart palpitations are showing up, digestive issues, acid reflux and nausea are regular companions. There may be muscle tremors, yet the idea of stopping feels genuinely impossible at this point, because the gap between how they feel on caffeine and how they feel without it is enormous. Withdrawal symptoms at this level of consumptions are severe. That gap between functional with caffeine and completely non-functional, functional without it, is what has them locked in. They are not drinking this much because they love it. They are drinking this much because stopping is worse. Level 6. The functional zombie level 6 is one of the most fascinating and quietly terrifying spots on the spectrum, because from the outside, this person looks perfectly normal. They hold a job, they show up, they make eye contact in meetings, they function. What almost no one realizes is that their entire capacity to function is being rented from caffeine, and the interest rate on that loan is destroying them. The level 6 person has lost the ability to operate at any meaningful level without caffeine. Sleep is chronically disrupted. Their body no longer knows how to naturally produce baseline energy because caffeine has been managing that process for years. Chronic fatigue has become the underwater current of their daily life. Not noticed yet because the caffeine keeps them just above the drowning line, but always there the moment the substance clears. The brain's natural energy regulation system has essentially outsourced itself to a chemical. Physically, the damage is accumulating. Long-term high caffeine intake strains the cardiovascular system. There are documented risks to heart health associated with sustained excessive consumption. Chronic acid reflux, bone density concerns, particularly for women. The persistent anxiety has shaded into something more chronic and harder to name. A low-grade, constant hum of overstimulation that they have been living inside for so long that they have forgotten it is not just their natural personality. I am just a high-strung person, maybe. Or maybe you have been flooding your central nervous system with stimulants for a decade. Attempts to quit at this level run into a wall that level 1 through 4 people genuinely cannot comprehend. Withdrawal symptoms are not just uncomfortable, they are temporarily incapacitating. Research confirms that after chronic high-dose use, quitting caffeine brings on a constellation of symptoms: severe headaches, profound fatigue described as an overpowering lethargy that complicates routine activities, deep mood disruption, brain fog, nausea, and in some cases muscle pain. These symptoms peak within 24 to 48 hours and can persist for up to 9 days. For a level 6 person who has obligations, a job, people depending on them, 9 days of effectively being unable to function is not a realistic withdrawal window. So they do not quit, they just keep going. The saddest part of level 6 is how invisible it is. Because they are still functioning, because caffeine is legal, because nobody stages an intervention over someone's third Red Bull of the morning. The dependence has been completely normalized by a culture that treats caffeine as a personality trait rather than a drug. And so the level 6 person carries this entirely alone, usually without ever framing what they are experiencing as addiction. It is addiction, though, by every clinical metric. Level 7, the clinical case. And now we arrive at the final tier. Level 7 is where caffeine use disorder meets the clinical definition and where researchers, psychiatrists and physicians actually sit up and pay attention. The DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Bible of Mental Health, officially recognizes 4 caffeine-related disorders: intoxication, withdrawal, and 2 others related to anxiety and sleep. Beyond those, the DSM-5 Section 3, the section reserved for conditions requiring further study, includes a proposed diagnosis called caffeine use disorder, defined by persistent caffeine despite harmful effects and a persistent desire or unsuccessful effort to cut down or control use. The fact that the world's foremost psychiatric reference manual has an entire proposed diagnostic category for this tells you everything you need to know about how real this is. Level 7 is where that proposed diagnosis applies cleanly and unambiguously. This person has tried to quit multiple times. They have perhaps made it 3 days, 4 days, a week, before the withdrawal was so destabilizing that they returned to the substance. They have a persistent desire, in the exact DSM language, to control their use and a persistent inability to do so. Research shows that among patients who actually seek treatment for problematic caffeine consumption, between 72 and 84% meet all 3 primary diagnostic criteria for caffeine use disorder. These are not casual drinkers who feel a bit groggy without their morning cup. These are people for whom caffeine use is creating genuine, documented clinical impairment. The physical picture at level 7 is serious. Chronic cardiovascular strain, severely disrupted sleep architecture. Not just getting less sleep, but losing the restorative quality of sleep entirely because caffeine's half-life keeps the brain partially stimulated through most of what should be rest. The anxiety has likely crossed into clinical territory. Some people at level 7 are experiencing panic attacks. The irritability and mood disruption are constant. Cognitive function, which caffeine was originally enlisted to protect, has actually declined because of the combination of chronic sleep deprivation and the brain's complete dependence on external stimulation to maintain arousal. What makes level 7 particularly sobering is the role that chronic neurological adaptation plays in this trap. The brain has done what brains do. It adapted to the repeated presence of a substance by restructuring itself around that substance. Adenosine receptors multiplied, dopamine pathways adjusted, the reward system recalibrated. Chronic caffeine exposure induces neuroadaptive changes, including adenosine receptor downregulation. And the intolerance withdrawal symptoms are often mistaken for typical fatigue, mood disorders, or other conditions, meaning many level 7 people are being treated for symptoms that are actually caffeine-induced, without anyone identifying the root cause. A survey of over 1,000 caffeine-consuming adults found that approximately 8% fulfilled the proposed DSM criteria for caffeine use disorder. That sounds like a small number until you apply it to a country where roughly 85% of the population drinks caffeine daily. The math becomes significant quickly. There is genuine treatment for this. It exists. The evidence-based approach is a slow, gradual taper, reducing intake week by week in measured steps rather than stopping abruptly. If someone drinks 8 cups per day, they move to 7, then 6, then 5, giving the brain and body time to adapt downward at each step rather than forcing a sudden crashing withdrawal. Adequate hydration, sleep support, and in some cases brief use of analgesics for the headache phase all assist the process. In a clinical trial specifically examining treatment for caffeine use disorder, a 6-week structured tapering program produced meaningful, sustained reductions in both consumption and caffeine-related distress. It works. It is just rarely pursued because caffeine addiction is so culturally invisible that most people at level 7 never seek treatment at all. The level 7 person often reaches a particularly grim irony. They are exhausted, anxious, sleepy badly, experiencing mood disruption, and potentially dealing with cardiovascular symptoms, which is to say, they are experiencing almost the exact same problems that originally drove them to start using caffeine heavily in the first place. The substance that was supposed to fight the fatigue has become the engine generating it. The thing that was supposed to sharpen focus has eroded the underlying capacity for it. They are running a tab they cannot pay off, borrowing energy from a tomorrow that keeps arriving more depleted than the last. And the cruel kicker, because caffeine is in everything, because it is marketed as a productivity tool and a social ritual and a personality type, nobody ever tells them this. Nobody sits them down and says, this substance has restructured your brain, and you are now paying a daily ransom to a chemical just to feel like a person. So the moral of the story is genuinely simple. Enjoy your coffee. Savor the ritual. Appreciate the taste. Use it thoughtfully and moderately for what it is, a pleasant, mild stimulant that is perfectly fine at reasonable doses. But know which level you are on. Know that there is a spectrum and that moving along it happens gradually, quietly, and usually without a single dramatic moment where a line got crossed. Know that dependency is not weakness. It is literally your brain doing what brains do when a substance shows up every single day. And know that the best thing caffeine can ever be for you is a choice, not a requirement. Stay below 400 milligrams. Actually sleep. Drink some water. And maybe, just maybe, try a morning without it once in a while, just to find out which level you are really on.